We are up and running, and you can take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to this 45-minute rapid session on You Have the Tech Chops. Now it's time to earn visibility and trust with content. And this was actually inspired by many years of conversations I've had with local technologists and educational programs over the years. I can tell you more about that. I'm John Reed. I live local. I'm in Northampton. I'm the co-founder of Diginomica, which is a niche media publication. We try to speak truth about the enterprise and technology and transformation. But in the process of that, I've developed a whole sort of theme around content strategy, and it's something I really believe in. And I'll tell you more about that. But right now, we're kind of just getting started. And so I would like to give a couple of you an opportunity to say why you're here, or even type it into the chat if you prefer. No one's required to be on cam, by the way, and you don't have to come off mute if you don't want either. But I certainly would welcome a little bit of both if you want. And I do want to mention one other thing, which is that this is just a 45-minute gig, but tomorrow I have a Birds of the Feather on the same topic, which is going to be a little more hands-on and workshop-y. So if you're really masochistic and want to double dip on this, then come on by again tomorrow and continue along this journey with me. We have one answer from Lisa. She's here because she wants to update her blog more often. Well, Lisa, I'll definitely try to motivate you to do that. That's certainly a core theme. Anyone else want to quickly either type or share on audio why you're here, why you chose this session? We're all busy, so anyone else? Carl says he's here because he'd like to understand ways for volunteers to contribute content. And Candace is curious. Okay, so I'm going to assume that all of you are either freelancers or working for relatively small companies or small solopreneurs of various kinds. If anyone works for a company larger than about 5 or 10 people, can you let me know by waving your hand or in the chat? These principles apply to almost everyone. Lisa, just type in maybe a couple details about your company so I can try to customize some of this for a slightly larger organization as well. I've applied these principles to very large companies. I've had chats with some very big technology firms about this. The good news is that individuals and smaller companies, in my opinion, have a big advantage in this area, even though resources and time constraints and all that. But we get to have more personality and be more authentic. And being authentic in your communications, as you guys probably figured out by now, is a really big win in terms of resonating with people. So what I'm going to do here, let's just see what Lisa has to say here. She works for Fishtown Analytics, makers of a data transformation tool, currently about 60 people. She's mostly interested in technical blogging of your own content, not specifically for your company. Right. And so you can definitely apply these things for sort of career visibility and advancement as well. And ideally, your company buys into what you're doing because it benefits everyone to have that visibility. But of course, some companies have a backwards culture and they don't understand that. Hopefully, Lisa, your company is very forward thinking and will end up supporting your blogging, because it's ideal if they see how that's a win for everyone. Makes your life easier and maybe allows you to not be as like time constrained between your work and your blogging as well. So anyway, feel free to chat at any point and raise your hand at any point and interrupt me. That's totally absolutely fine. So let me go through some stuff, and I'll come up for air periodically. And I'm going to go fairly fast on the theory that you can always view the recording later. But if anything you want to elaborate on, let me know. I've done this kind of thing for several PodCamps as well. So for Western Mass, so got a bunch of stuff I want to mention to you. But this all started many years ago when I was a co-founder of Hidden Tech in 2001, maybe. And basically what I became aware of is there's so many talented technologists and solopreneurs of various flavors that were having a hard time really connecting to an audience and getting the word out about who they are and what they're good at. And so they were incredibly talented, but they lacked clients and they lacked a business context around what they do. And then for me, I'm kind of an inherent masochist as a creator. always creating, writing, video, podcasting, I've seen the incredible power of content. And then the other thing I saw that's a more recent development. Oh, and by the way, Lisa says that she has a very forward-thinking company, so that's awesome. Glad for that. That will really help you down this journey. But secondly, that I observed also, especially in more recent years, a fairly tragic mistake that I felt a lot of folks were making, which is they were jumping right from, oh crap, I need more leads, to, oh, I'm going to hop on social media and start like interacting and trying to promote my business through social. And the problem with that is that social is so often an empty vessel unless there's a reason why you're there. And the beauty of content is that if you do the hard work of content first, then your social media strategies can start to make a lot more sense, both for you as an individual and for your business. When you shortcut that, try to get right on social, huge mistakes. I mean, I see it all the time with, I manage a pretty big local Facebook group in Northampton. A lot of businesses always trying to advertise in my group. And I keep trying to help them to understand that where's your free workshop? Where's your free seminar? Where's the things that'll draw people in? And no, they just want to plaster with ads, and it doesn't work. We're battling for attention right now. And what's happened is that it's harder and harder to buy attention, right? Like, you have a lot of money to spend, but who cares? No one wants to see your ad. No one wants to hear your commercial. But if you can help them solve problems, well, that's a whole different story. So there is a little bit of a spiritual component to this, because if you're going to commit to this, one of the biggest things you have to do is to figure out what you want to be really good at and known for. That's a big deal, because you're going to be putting a lot of time into this. And there's some debate about this as far as how much passion you need to feel about your profession and your creative life. I feel you have to have a lot of passion for it. And I think the goal is to eventually be the best in the world at your specific niche. Now, I know that sounds really corny and overly ambitious, but if you don't like that, then best in the valley, or best in whatever town you live in, at least. But the idea being like, what is that unique niche that you're going to really go for? Because the bigger companies have broader bases covered, but they probably don't have your very, very specific niche covered. And so that's what you want to do. Now, your second really, really big thing there is you need it to be fairly marketable, because you can become known for things that aren't very marketable or connected to your underlying business. You want this to connect in some profound way that makes sense. I learned that the hard way many years ago when I decided I was going to become the best ever at writing about forgotten hair bands in the heavy metal arena. And the thing that really cost me dearly there was it wasn't a marketable niche. I did succeed in a way, and it was beautiful and wonderful at that time, but it wasn't marketable, sustainable niche. Later on, just to give you another example, I decided I want to become an expert in ERP and SAP careers, because I was focused on large enterprise and creating a lot of newsletter content. And I became the foremost authority in that for a while, and I got a pretty big audience. The problem was I just didn't have enough passion for it. It was a little too calculated. And so these days I've come up with, I can tell you more about my thing, but it has to do more with the passion I have for certain kind of very informal, jugular kind of video and enterprise content, which is heavily saturated with buzzwords and bullshit. And I want to do things differently in a more satirical and informal way and stuff. So I have some very specific things that I'm trying to accomplish there, but you need to kind of have that. Once you have that, then the steps to accomplish this are not actually too hard. And okay, now Lisa says that's a problem for me. I'm passionate about a million different things. And I totally get that. And look, I mean, the thing is, I have hobbies and interests that aren't part of this focus. So it's not like you have to abandon everything. I love to hike on weekends or whatever. I like to play my guitar sometimes as well. That has nothing to do with this though. And the thing is, it does require some focus, Lisa, of some kind, I think. Now, it can be fairly broad or it can be very narrow, but there has to be some focus, because that's what you want as far as that sort of thing around when people meet you at a networking event. Do they remember you? Like, can you summarize what it is you're good at? I remember one of my Hidden Tech co-founders, Claudia, she was so good at this. She'd be like, Claudia, what do you do? She's like, I help, it was something like, I help aspiring authors become outstanding published success stories or whatever it was. Like, so she had this thing and it's like, oh, if you want to write a book, you got to talk to this woman, right? And so she only had to really get that across once. Now, granted, we aren't doing a whole lot of networking right now. I totally get that, but it will return. And in the meantime, it does happen online as well. So it becomes very important to kind of have that. Once you have that, then you start to think about a few different pieces of the puzzle, which are things about what is going to be your medium. Like Lisa, she's figured out it's going to be blogging. She already knows that. But for other people, maybe it's podcasting. For other people, maybe it's short form video. You got to kind of figure out what you're good at, what you're interested in. And I'm never a fan of like doing everything or chasing what other people want you to do. You have to figure out the mediums that you care about, that you want to learn about. And then how do you create a sustainable practice around it? Because content is a discipline. And if you're in a larger organization, everyone needs to kind of learn to embrace that discipline. If you're more on your own, you kind of have to embrace it for yourself. And the beauty of this is that you don't have to completely kill yourself in producing content all the time. I mean, I blog like 3 to 5 times a week, but that's my gig. You don't have to do that. And so you figure out like, there is a certain frequency you have to figure out. And, you can't get away probably with once a month on this stuff. But I know people who are known for putting out something really stellar once a week, and they do totally fine with that. And in fact, a lot of times the quality of that is really the key. And maybe from there, they break that into chunks and start sharing it on social channels and stuff like that. So that's sort of like an overall sort of framework. I have a lot more details I want to share with you and some gotchas and things to think about, but that's kind of a framework. And if you can do that alongside what it is you're good at for paying the bills, it's going to start to pay off. Now, what it's really about is earning topic authority, but it goes deeper than that because it's about becoming a part of a community and serving a community of like-minded people. I mean, some of the organizations that are involved with this Nerd Summit are doing an amazing job of that. They created this Slack channel and this conference, and they create all this opportunity to connect around that. And they're very incredibly helpful people for helping to solve problems for other people's businesses. You think that doesn't pay off eventually in terms of networking and clients and stuff like that? It absolutely does. And there's some methodologies around that I can get into. But anyhow, I'm going to stop for a sec. Are there any things that you guys want to ask me before I continue further? Carl, you look like you might have something on your mind.
So I'm remembering a guideline that was given to me when participating in LinkedIn. And I don't do that as much as I might have done a few years ago, but it was the idea of always have, like, say, offer 4 things before you make your pitch, before you ask for something, because otherwise, the people will sense a pitch coming, and they're not real keen on that. But be sure that you're willing to contribute before you're willing to do the ask.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No, that's a really, really great point. And I will send you guys a couple of links to articles that I've written on these various topics. But one of the really big things is that it's really about earning trust. And content, if it's authentic and open, earns trust. And it's a process of value creation, right? So the more you help someone, the more they trust you, the more they feel value to you. To your point, Carl, a lot of times by the time you've earned that trust, you don't really even have to ask, which is why a lot of this has been called inbound marketing, because it kind of comes to you. But I wrote in this one article, and I'll pop a link. I'll read you this thing. We call it free content. It's important to understand what the dynamics of free content distribution are. It's really not free so much as a process of earning trust. When I share content, I'm giving you something that hopefully has some soul and integrity behind it, and it's going to help you in some way. If you think you're getting value out of what I'm giving you, your natural human tendency is going to be to want to engage further with that which you perceive to be value. In that sense, all form of content's a value exchange between you and your audience. Because then when you start thinking about not just free content, but content that people might want to sign up for, then you can think through the process of how much your audience will exchange for versus what you're willing to give them. And I'll send you a link to this overall article that I just quoted from. But the point being that in every industry, there's a purchasing and buying process, and a lot of times there's several tiers of content that fit in with that. So you might start with blogs and stuff like that. But of course, you've probably seen a lot of companies then go for sign-up content like webinars or various kinds of white papers or events. Now you're starting to gather a little more data on that person, which they freely give you. Ironically enough, people are not wanting to give data to so many people, but they're giving it to you because they trust you. And that becomes a stairway into actually looking at maybe I'll buy your product. In some industries, it's about getting a free trial and earning even more trust through offering a valuable free trial. And what it's all about, Carl, and I think it's a really important distinction, is not teasing people with stuff, but really giving them a true value. It's so annoying when someone gives you 2 sentences and then they ask for your email. You go on these websites now and they're asking for your email. You've been there for like 5 seconds. It's like, no, let's earn a little bit of trust first. Let's give you something worthwhile. Then you start getting into that exchange of data and information. Carl, do you have a follow-up to that?
Well, I was also struck by Lisa's comment about trying to maintain that focus. And I think that personally, I'm also kind of scattered, and I think that organizations also struggle with that idea of, we keep looking at Apple for their, they will often just use a word or 2 words to deliver their message. And it's a word you can, or phrase, think different, that you can just, it pulls everybody forward. So that challenge of finding that focus, and with that, you got to do the hard stuff of saying no to a whole bunch of stuff.
Absolutely. Candace, you came here out of curiosity. Are we getting any of your questions answered? Do you have anything you want to ask?
No, this is great. I right. You have to find your niche, right? I don't really know what my niche is yet. I don't know. I'm 60 and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But
it happens, right? Yeah.
But yeah, it's like, also too, like, podcast, the blog, right? Your web presence, like your website, I would imagine, and then podcasts, videos, vlogs. But the thing too is to find the niche, and then also too to build that, right? Before you actually, you have to have content before you even, start publishing that you're here. I think.
Yeah,
great. I love it.
And I would say that there's a difference between kind of finding your niche and not and kind of struggling with focus, in the sense that, like, you can start with a focus theme even if you're not sure what your exact niche is just yet. You could start writing about, like, for example, you can start writing about Agile, but then realize that your strength is really in working with the design thinkers and stuff like that. And so your niche really ends up being around design thinking, but you started broader. And one of the reasons I want to encourage people around that is a lot of times you refine your niche through putting out content and getting audience feedback, finding out what resonates with them and getting their criticism and concerns. So one thing I really want to encourage is that you find out by doing. I remember one of my favorite blogs, one of my friends did a while back. She had like a marketing degree, and she was like writing about being a first-year post-grad marketer. So she wasn't even an expert yet, but it was so interesting for her to share her journey. And as she did that, she developed a little more core expertise that she started honing in on. So one thing I really wanted to share with you is that you brought up, Candace, is I'm still a believer in having your own website. And, some small businesses are totally dependent on social channels, but I really believe you got to have your own website, because that's where you have a lot more control over things like no algorithm changes are going to be made that screw up your business. And there's an SEO search concept there around people coming to you. So the most preferable approach is what I call, and I borrowed this from HubSpot a few years ago. I don't know if they still use the term, but it's a hub and spoke model. So your website becomes the hub, which is probably where your blog is going to live, for example. And you have a lot more control then over linking from your blog to things like your demo and product pages or your consulting pages. But you might have spokes as well. And to Carl's point, maybe his key spoke becomes LinkedIn because he spends some time there and maybe should spend more time there. And now he has more stuff he can share on LinkedIn. Whereas some people blog only on LinkedIn. But I've noticed the folks that only blog on LinkedIn are mostly people that are into personal branding and consulting. They don't have their own business. And because LinkedIn blogging might give you more visibility, but you have no control over that content. And that content's not bringing people back to your services and such. But if you're a speaker, like a high price speaker, maybe just being branded is more important, in which case maybe more blogging on LinkedIn. But you have to decide, because look, you're not going to be on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and LinkedIn and, you know, who the heck knows what else you might choose. You're going to have to focus on where your audience is and be prepared to kind of go where they go. But one of the cores here is you want to build community around stuff. So it's not, so many people talk about this buying cycle of like awareness. It's a funnel. It's like awareness and consideration, purchase. Like you want to be reaching people before they're even in a buying mode. You know, people that care about the same topics that you do. And that's what my approach is all about. And one other thing I wanted to mention to you as well, which I think is really important, is I kind of look at it like that there's two main kinds of content that we can be producing. And I think they're both really good. One of them is what I call helpful content. Helpful content is just content that solves people's problems. Frequently answered questions. Just methodology stuff. What, you know, I have a technical question. Here's the answers. You know, and that's just being helpful. And it's not that hard to create that kind of content as long as you have expertise in that area, and it builds a lot of goodwill. And then the other kind of content that is, I think, a little harder to create is more like thought leadership content, which is more, I think of it as like more opinionated content where you're weighing in on topics that matter in your industry. And maybe you're linking to other people who have been writing about something and saying, here's what I think about this. That content, I think, is a little harder to write because now you're really letting yourself out there with your opinions and views. And you have to perfect that a little bit. But both kinds of those contents are both effective. And I think I would probably look at how you do some of both. They play different roles, right? Like if people are on your product pages, then FAQs can be really helpful to enhance those pages and give more search traffic and stuff like that. But it doesn't take the place of broader commentary on your industry, which might also be very useful as well. So, you know, ultimately it's about this journey towards topic authority. And I still talk about how there is a hierarchy of content too. So you're still going to get more play if you're a book author than if you're a blog writer. One of my sources of frustration is that I blog so much, I haven't compiled enough books of my stuff. So I published some books, but you know, I've probably blogged about 10 books. And if I could find lock myself in a room for 6 months, I could probably put out about 6 books, but I blog so much. Well, the blogs are good. And I try to get there by like organizing them into topics. Like I'll send you a link. I have about 50 articles on content strategy for my industry. It's not even a complete list anymore because I gave up on updating it because I was writing too much. But anyway, that's a big list of those there. But the point is, like, there's still a hierarchy of content, and you know, like if you produce an hour documentary, that's going to get more play than a 60-second off the cuff kind of thing. If you produce a training course, whether it's free or paid, that's going to have more credibility for you than like an hour-long webinar. So there is a hierarchy of content, but one good thing is that you can build towards that. So as you create content, it becomes inventory, like I said. And I have before taken blogs and turned them into books. So it's like there is a journey there. And you know, and podcasts maybe can eventually become audiobook chapters, perhaps, depending on what you do with it. So anyway, that's another really big point I wanted to make, just as you think about this going forward. And it sounds silly. Like, why would people respect you more as your book author versus like, well, you've published as much blogs, it's the same content. Well, it's just perception, and people think of it that way, and it has an impact on your business. Any comments about any of that?
Even though they don't buy books.
I know, Carl, it's mind blowing. And that's the weird thing, is they might even buy might not even buy your book. But it still carries a gravitas, especially when it comes to things like paid speaking and stuff like that. There's a saying in publishing, says Lisa, I keep saying Lisa. It's probably Lee's. I'm really sorry about that. There's a saying in publishing, your front log is your backlog. Your most recent stuff sells your older stuff. Oh yeah, totally. I mean, that's one beautiful thing, is once you get going, then you can start updating on previous things. And one thing I really like is like how you can bring social conversations into your content once you're creating it. When people respond, you can have a follow-up and say, hey, the last piece I did sparked a lot of questions or debate. And then you start to build on what you already have. Carl, are we going to say something?
No.
Okay, you can stay off mute if you want, since you're contributing frequently and you don't seem to be making any noise over there, unless a dog comes running in and barking, in which case would change my view on that.
The dog is upstairs.
The dog's upstairs. Excellent. So let's see. I also wanted to talk with you about, let's see, I'm just looking at a couple of my blogs here. I wanted to talk with you about reaching buyers. And mostly this is stuff I've already covered, but I want to review how to reach the buyers. I wrote this for my industry, which is B2B, but it doesn't really, I said it's called We Are All Publishers now, but the decision-making process varies, but generally buyers are more informed. They conduct more of their own research. They have sharper BS filters against marketing blitzes. They value informative content over sales platitudes. So sales and marketing is really compelled to change as a result of that. The impact of peer reviews is an example of a more empowered consumer. And for some of us, we have to think about peer review sites, and if we want to be on them and stuff like that, that puts pressures on the entire business to be more customer and content focused. And one of the best kinds of content you can create, if you have happy customers in your niche, which is a nice milestone. Okay, I have a niche, now I have some happy customers. Write about them. Get their permission to write case studies around what you've done with them. Or maybe they would write something or do an interview with you or what have you. That's incredibly valuable, because now you're taking references and turning that into content. It's very, very, very compelling. Eventually you can even get your customers talking to outside reporters and stuff, and get third parties reporting on your customers, which has an even greater impact than you writing about them. You don't just want to reach the buyer, number 2 on my list here, but the community around the buyer. That includes subject matter experts and influencers who impact the buying decision. It includes audience members who will never buy, but who might influence your buyers. And one of the things I didn't mention yet, which is really core to my whole approach around this, is curation. So in addition to creating content, there's a lot of value in being a curator. And so if you, for example, create an email newsletter, and email still puts butts in seats, so it's still something to think about. Maybe part of your newsletter is the highlights of the week or the month in your industry. And maybe you're going to share some stuff there from other people that you respect who are also creating content. Well, it's amazing how much people appreciate that, especially thoughtful curation. And you can mention that on social channels as well. That works really well on Twitter, where you can tag people easily, but also on LinkedIn. And now you're curating as well. So curating makes you smarter. And it also, builds an audience and community around your work. So the power of curation, and part of that, of course, is figuring out how you're going to curate. So you evaluate various tools to figure out what's the best ways to curate content. And everyone has their own. I still prefer RSS-based readers. I love NewsBlur. A lot of people really like Feedly, but you don't have to use RSS, because RSS can be a little bit busy. Pocket's a really nice app that you can use to kind of save stuff for later and curate out of that. So don't forget about the power of that as well. And then next on my list, break down the marketing wall. Don't just market to the community, become a part of that community, which is kind of what I think about is, people respect you when you're not selling to them. Carl alluded to this earlier. When you're just sitting around a table with them trying to solve problems, it's amazing how that leads to commercial discussions down the line. So yes, become a part of the community. And a lot of marketers don't understand this. They think about, oh, we got to market to this segment or that segment, and we got these buyer personas and stuff. And creating personas can be a very useful exercise to some extent, but I keep telling people, like, break down those walls. Don't think of yourself as marketing to someone. Think of yourself as working alongside them. And what are their top questions? And one of the biggest things I encourage our clients to do is to figure out what your top 5 or 10 customer questions are. What do they keep asking? Writing about those is really great because then you can point people to them instead of having to answer the same question over again. It's great for SEO and search because you can load those answers up with keywords and create dedicated content around those phrases. I'm amazed at how many businesses don't have dedicated blog posts to their top 10 questions. It's such an obvious thing to do. But I see all the protests that go on with that. It's like, oh, we're so busy with this and that. It's like, but let me guess, a lot of what you're busy about is chasing leads, right? And chasing your next project instead of building this sort of organic trust that builds a future pipeline. So content is a discipline, and it's a hard discipline. And some organizations will never understand that. But that creates more opportunities for folks like you and me anyway. Lise, I got to ask you, did I motivate you at all? You said you needed more blogging motivation. And did I help you at all to motivate yourself?
Yeah, I'm always inspired after talks like these. Now it's just a question of like carrying through. Yeah, one of the things I struggle with, as I said, is the fact that like I have a million interests. And yes, I want to blog about like technical topics like front end development, which is what I work in. But at the same time, I also want to talk about like having ADHD or, my writing or things like that. So I think what I've sort of landed on, and obviously this is not a strategy that would work in like the B2B space, but like for me, sort of what I've landed on is that I am the brand. That, these are all sort of parts of me. And I'm never going to be passionate about one thing for long enough to be like a deep subject expert, but that's who I am. So, and my goal is more, social connection, rather than like, nobody's going to pay me, to write an article for them, for example. But, so that's my take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, I do think there's a difference between like having a more inclusive blog versus what you would say at a networking event, right, Lise? So at a networking event, you might lead with the front end development thing, and you want to have something really catchy about what you specialize in there, because there's a lot of front end developers. So that's one piece. But just to give you an example of this, Lise, that might be helpful to you, I'm going to paste in a link. This is a link of a blog for a friend of mine named Vijay Sankar. And I remember Vijay when he was just a junior IBM consultant, working on projects for the first time. And he was just starting to do a little blogging. And I encouraged him because I'm a huge fan of the power of content. It's totally transformed my career. And he got to blogging, and it was amazing to watch his career transform. And he's just such a generous spirit. And he's notorious for writing these typo-filled blogs in like airport tarmacs on his iPhone. And now he's not on tarmacs right now, obviously, but he still blogs on his iPhone. But if you see his blog, it's on all things big and small. His opinions are mine. He's a major IBM executive. The top story is about his experiences with COVID, because he wanted to help people understand this is not just the flu, folks. And then below that, you'll find something on Indian cooking. But he also blogs a lot on work concepts, things like agile development or whatever it is that's on his mind around project management or leadership. And people like that, because the thing about the blog is that as long as it keeps you going and keeps you creating, I think it's okay. It's just a matter of managing readers' expectations so they know, like, hey, this is a blog all about me and all my various capacities. I think that's fine. But I would say that the more focused you're willing to be, the better off you're going to be, because you do want to be developing a body of work in a particular area of expertise. And so there is some value to focus. But if to Lisa's point, she would feel like she was compromising part of her identity and being too narrow. So in that case, yeah, just be broader and let people know this is all me that you're going to get. And I think a lot of people will dip into that because they'll love the authenticity behind it. It's nice to see Kelly here. Kelly is a huge nerd guy, of course, and he's put a lot of this into practice as well. I've really enjoyed his agile meetups that he used to help back when we actually did those things in person. So thanks for joining us towards the end here, Kelly.
Oh yeah,
Glad to have you.
wanted to make sure to catch some John Reed time.
Oh yeah, thank you. Well, it'll be good on replay. And hey, I'm doing a Birds of the Feather version of this tomorrow. So if for some reason you're really into troubling yourself with me, you can do it again. It'll be a little more workshop-y than this one. This one's been a little more me going on various rants about basically establishing topic authority and the value behind that and what that means for how businesses are changing. One thing I haven't talked about enough, but that fits into with stuff that Kelly is interested in, I'm sure, is how this works from a business capacity as far as thinking out the tiers of content you're going to have so that you have this, eventually you have a pretty elegant process on your website from people consuming free content to moving into sign up content to becoming more active subscribers and customers. And so there's a whole process that you want to sort of architect around your website that does that, and getting that balance right is a really big thing. But I do think that most people forget a little bit that they get so caught up in the lead gen exercises that they forget that how do I reach people that don't drink my Kool-Aid? Because that's the biggest thing that companies struggle with, is they think everyone loves them and their brand. Well, I'm sorry to say, life doesn't work that way. And so you have to learn, if you can learn how to talk about issues that matter to people without discussing your brand, that is huge. And so Kelly, for example, can tell you about Agile for an hour without ever mentioning his company. And that's big, because that opens up ways of earning trust. I mean, I always talk about this like you're trying to simulate the experience of sitting around a dinner party at a trade show. And how awkward would it be if you were shoving a business card in someone's hand the second they had a fork, But that's how a lot of people operate with content online, and it doesn't work. And when you develop that kind of more robust sort of depth of content, then suddenly everything changes for you. And now your social persona just now really makes sense why you're on social media, why you're participating. People know people start tagging you and saying, hey, I wonder what John thinks about this, because they know that's what John cares about. That's what he's been writing about. And it really is transformational. But consistency of commitment is the key, and you have to make it manageable. And that is the one thing about content, is that the kind of content that people need, it eats you a little bit. It takes your time, it sucks your time. And you need organizational and personal permission to do that. You need family permission to do that. Dogs need walking too. So you have to figure out how it's all done. So we only have a few more minutes. If anyone has a burning question, now is the time. I think we've covered a lot of them. Anyone? If not, I can fill up the next 3 minutes with more blog content that I have for you. But I hope I motivated everyone.
Thank you, John. So what you talked about finding that time and getting that family permission, as well as other permissions in our circles, including the dog. And I think that also that's something that I certainly struggle with. And I think that finding a way to, it becomes almost easy when I have that clarity, and almost impossible when I don't. And so finding some sort of, I guess, hook to keep pulling me forward, or toward that thing. And I like the idea of mixing the technical stuff with the personal stuff, because that is a way of bringing genuineness to this conversation. And I think that's I'm gonna take that with me.
Yeah, because I think there's a vulnerability that is very appealing when we can show it to people and we admit like, hey, here's something I'm struggling with. And I think I read this one book on thought leadership that was pretty good. And thought leadership is a phrase I haven't used very much today, but I prefer the word phrase topic authority, because I think thought leadership is really pretentious, but it's basically the idea about how do you become known for something. And the thing that bothered me about the book was it made it seem like you would always have all the answers. And I don't think that's true. I think a lot of times it's about provoking the right questions and being able to open up that conversation around the right questions that people care about, and not having to know everything all the time. That's really boring. Lee says, the CEO of my company says, people call me a thought leader, which kind of makes you want to kill myself. Yeah, totally. I mean, it can be a very, I guess, constricting phrase in some ways. But Carl, one thing I think that can help you a little bit, I mean, there's two pieces to what you described about as far as this family aspect or tension. One is just clear boundaries and communication, and honest communication have to have that. But then for motivation, part of what I talk about with connecting to a community around your work, it helps you on the tough days to have a community of people that are asking you questions. So investing, even though I kind of criticize social media, investing in it can be very helpful to, once you have the content, very, very helpful. I'm about to get cut off because we're almost done, but I do want to mention real quick, a few other really key points, which is from that 20-point gut check link that I sent earlier. Content's no longer about broadcasting. It's about building community around your expertise. Those who broadcast content are at a disadvantage to those who are accessible and interact. And that's something I try to put into practice. You can probably see from the talk today. Just talking with you guys for 45 minutes would be a huge drag. Be informed by data, not ruled by it. If a piece of content performs badly, that doesn't always mean it's a bad direction. Blog posts can be salvaged for their intellectual parts. Content can be repackaged and served back to the community. Now, you do need to have your analytics set up in such a way that you can figure out what people respond to, and eventually you figure out, oh, they like these exit links and they clicked on my sign up and stuff. Yeah, but in general, don't be ruled by that. Let it inform you. Strike a balance between content for search and going to where your audience is in the walled gardens. And be careful about interrupting and alienating people with what I call interruption marketing. Find that subtle art of nudging people once you've earned their trust without annoying them too much. And it's too many marketers are annoying people with their interruption marketing, and there are better ways, but we have to find our own balance there. But the one thing I would say is that even if people like your stuff, don't necessarily trust them to come back. Think of it in terms of followers and subscribers. Sometimes instead of opt-in community, I talk about opt-in subscribers and opt-in audiences. Give people a chance to follow you and subscribe to you in as many ways and forms as humanly possible, so that they are saying, hey, you can ping me when you have fresh stuff. Because the old days where someone would bookmark your website and remember to come back once a week or once a day, those days are gone. And so you have to plan in the opt-in piece of it. So anyhow, I really hope this was valuable for you guys. And once again, feel free to come back tomorrow if you want more, but I really appreciated you guys coming and participating the way you did.
Thank you, John. This is very, very good.
Gabe, I finished on time.